So here, so there is a thread synchronization. So we are talking about this is thread locking or thread synchronization. Now, what is this thread locking or thread? What is this thread locking or thread synchronization? Okay, so thread locking or thread synchronization. See, when more than one thread, suppose when you are working with multi-threaded applications, so when more than one thread operate on one shared resource. Okay, assume that this is called as which one? Shared resource. So this is called as a shared resource, right? So when more than one thread operate on a shared resource. Okay, when one thread is operating on the shared resource, not allowing another thread to perform operation. When one thread, see when one thread is accessing this resource, not allowing another thread to access it until this thread execution is what? Completed. So that can be done by using synchronization or what is that? Locking. Okay. So thread synchronization allows you to develop thread safe applications. So here when more than one thread, when more than one thread, more than one thread operate on shared resource. So when one thread is operating on shared resource, not allowing other threads to access is called synchronization. It's nothing but you are allowing to execute those threads how sequential. Okay, developing thread safe application. Now that is when you are working with the multiple threads. So when one thread is operating on a shared resource, not allowing other threads to access the same resource is called as which one? Synchronization here. It's called as a synchronization here, right? So when more than one thread operate on a shared resource, when one thread is operating on a shared resource, not allowing other threads to access it is called as what here? Synchronization. It's called as a synchronization here, right? How this synchronization is done? By using one object here. So what is that object is? Locking object or lock object. So there is one object is there. So what is the name of the object? Lock object. So this lock object provide two methods. One is acquire and one more is release. This lock object provide two methods. One method is called acquire and one more method is release. So here two methods are there. One is acquire and one more is a release. So threading dot lock. So this class implementing primitive lock objects. Once a thread has acquired the lock, subsequent attempts to acquire it block until it is released. So any thread can release. Okay, but this locking can be done with the time. So the name of the class is a lock here. What is the name of the class here is lock. So threading dot lock, the class implementing primitive lock objects. Once a thread has acquired a lock, subsequent attempts to acquire it block until it is released. So any thread may be released, right? How it acquires it? By using acquire. So if acquire is a true, by default acquire is a true, means it will block. Lock or what is that? Block. If acquire is a false, it doesn't lock. Okay. And release. How it will release? By using a method called which one? Release. So any thread can call this release method, which acquire the lock on that object. So there is a method called what here? Release. Release is one more method. So any thread can release. So release a lock. This can be called from any thread, not only the thread which has acquired the lock. So two methods are there. One is acquire and one more is what here? Release. Okay, two methods are there. One is acquire and one more is a release. For example, if you take online reservation, for example, if you take some bus reservation is there. Okay, assume that there is a bus reservation. For example, there is a bus reservation is there. So where there is a multiple passengers. So multiple passengers send a request to the server for reserving tickets. Okay, multiple passengers send a request for reserving what here? Tickets. Passenger 1, passenger 2, passenger 3, and there is a passenger 4. So passenger 1 send a request and passenger 2 send a request. Passenger 3 send a request. Passenger 4 send a request. But all these passengers reserve the ticket of same bus. So this is called as which object here? Bus object. This is a bus object. Only one bus. This one bus object or one bus is reserved by how many people? 4. So within this bus object, bus is having number of seats. Number of seats are there. The number of seats in bus are what? Some 40. So there is a number of seats. And there are some functions like reserve. So there is a function called which one? Reserve is a method. Reserve is a method. Now this reserve method is having a logic of reserving the seats. This reserve method is having a logic of reserving the seats. Okay, but your reservation server, is multi-threaded. Your reservation server is what here? Multi-threaded. Okay. So when multiple passengers send a request, for every passenger, your server create one thread. Okay, for every passenger, your server create one thread. So scheduling of this is done by the thread scheduler. Okay. Suppose first passenger is reserving a ticket. Until the reservation of passenger 1 is not completed, I should not allow to reserve any other passenger. It means this code has to be locked. This reservation logic should be locked by which one? Thread 1. Okay. So until reservation is not completed, The other thread should not execute the content of which one reservation. So in that case, what will happen? Sometimes you may get an error saying that seats are not available, because who will enter in between? Other passengers. Even though it is not completed, some other passenger will enter and reserve what? Seats. To avoid that, until the until this passenger execution is completed. Okay, suppose if this code is locked by this thread, thread 2 cannot execute this block. So why? Because this code is locked by which one? Thread 1. So thread 2 will wait until this thread 1 release what here? Lock. But how a thread can acquire the lock? By using a method called acquire. By using a method called which one? Acquire is a method. So by using this method acquire, it acquire the lock. And by using a method release, it release the lock. By using a method acquire, it acquire the lock. By using a method release, it release the lock, right? That is how it will provide the synchronization between threads. That is how it will provide the synchronization. Right? So
Recording in
reservation,
progress.
what we required, suppose import. I said import which module? Threading module. So there is a shared resource. What is a shared resource here? Bus. Bus is a shared resource, and bus is having, okay, whenever I create a bus, I create a bus with number of seats. So the number of seats in bus is how many here? 40 seats, right?
Recording in progress.
So who calls the reserve method? This reserve method is called by the thread. So before calling the logic of reserve method, it should acquire the lock. If the lock is acquired, then if the lock is available, then it acquire it. Okay, if the lock is not available, then it will wait until the other thread releases what? Lock. Okay. So what you are saying here, self dot, log dot. What is the name of the method? Acquire. So thread acquire the lock and then call for I in range of, yes, S is nothing but number of seats. So at a time it is trying to reserve. How many seats here? One seat. So self dot seats equal to self dot seats minus 1. After that, I'm displaying the message saying that your seats are reserved. Okay, along with the name. So I'm displaying the name and I'm saying seats are what is it? Reserved. And seats are reserved and available seats. Even I'll try to display and available seats available. So available seats, and these are number of seats available. These are number of seats available. So for that, you are using one method called what here? Reserve, right? Init is there and reserve is there. So one is acquiring and one more is what? Releasing the lock. Self dot lock dot. What is that here? Release. So after reservation, it just release the lock so that this lock can acquired by what? Another thread. So this reservation is done by what? Thread. So I'm creating one thread here. I'm creating a thread. So all these are the objects. All these are the objects of which thread? Some reserve thread. So you are creating object of reserve thread. So T1 is object of reserve thread. T2 is object of reserve thread. T3 is object of reserve thread. T4 is object of reserve thread. So all these are the objects of reserve thread. So there is a reserve thread is a class, and this inherit. Okay, this inherit threading dot. What is the name of the class? Thread. So reserve thread inherit which class here? Thread class. A reserve thread inherits which class here? Thread class. Okay, so next, so this reserve thread reserve the seats of the bus. Means whenever I create a thread, I create a thread with which object? Bus object. So this reserve thread is reserving the seats of which bus? And who's reserving name of the person and number of seats? Now I'm saying self dot bus equal to B and self dot name equal to name and self dot number of seats equal to S. So this reserve thread reserve the seats of what? Bus. But which bus? So that you define it at the time of creating which object? Thread object. At the time of thread object, you will send a bus object and the name of the person who's reserving the seats and how many seats are reserved, that is called as S. Then after that, then after that, so after that, there is a method called, so the operation of a thread you write inside which method? Run method. So thread, okay, thread what it is doing? See, thread is reserving the seats. But how thread is reserving the seats? By calling reserve method of what? Bus. So I'll say self dot bus dot. What is the name of the method is calling? Reserve method. It's calling the reserve method by sending what is the name of the person and sending the number of seats. So thread is calling which method here? Reserve method. And reserve method is having which one? Acquire. It means thread is calling which method? Reserve method. Before executing this logic, first it acquire what? Log. Then after acquiring the log, it execute this logic and then release the log. So who's calling this reserve method of bus? Thread. Thread is calling the reserve method by acquiring the log and then reserve it and then what? Release it. Suppose if another thread is trying to acquire the log, it is already locked by what? Another thread. So it will wait until this thread releases what? Log. So how many threads are allowed here? Only one thread. Okay. So this is a function main here. So I create a bus object. Bus object is created and thread 1. So these threads are nothing but number of passengers, right? So here I'm writing reserve thread by sending bus object. Now who's reserving is Naresh and want to reserve 10 seats. So which object is sent to the bus thread here? Bus object. Because passenger 1 want to reserve the seats of bus. Assume that this is one bus 1. Okay, passenger 1 want to reserve the seats of bus 1. Now name of the passenger is Naresh and he want to reserve 10 seats. And thread 2 equal to reserve thread. Thread 2 equal to reserve thread. Now this person also want to reserve the seats of same bus object. And here number of seats are how many? 5. So how many passengers are reserving the seats of the same bus? 2 passengers. One is Naresh and one more is what? Suresh. Until Naresh reservation is not completed, Suresh cannot reserve. Or until Suresh reservation is not completed, Naresh reservation is not done. Okay. So how can you execute the thread? By calling which method here? Start method. T1 dot start and T2 dot start. So here you have to call the init method of thirty and
Recording in
remaining seats are
progress.
what? 15. So any number of times you execute, any number of times you execute. So there will be a synchronization between the threads. Suppose assume that if I don't use here, if I don't use here acquire and if I don't use here release. So what will happen? There will not be any synchronization. If I run this, now you can see Naresh seats are reserved and available seats are 30. Suresh seats are reserved and available seats are 15. Okay. You test it by running number of times. You don't get the result at once, right? You test it by executing number of times so that somewhere you get the wrong result. Somewhere you get the wrong result here. Somewhere you get the wrong result. You have to test it number of times. Okay, one time you may not get the output. So testing can be done in different ways here. Okay. So you have to run number of times this to know about this logical error. So you have to execute number of times here will increase, otherwise number of seats. Says 20 seats. So execute number of times. So you get the logical error because thread scheduling is completely depends on what? Thread scheduler. So somewhere you'll get some logical error. You have to test it executing number of times. So we'll execute. So somewhere you get the error, logical error, you'll get it somewhere. You get the logical error by saying same seats or something. Okay. So somewhere you get the logical error. Okay, somewhere you get the logical error, you can see that. Okay, execute number of times. If you execute number of times, you may get which error? Logical error. Or we'll create 3 threads here, 10 and 15 T3 equal to reserve thread. So that you should know it, right? So what is the problem with the thread synchronization? So this person is reserving again 10 seats. Okay. Now, no synchronization here. There's no synchronization here, right? Not saved. We have to start this T3 dot start. So you execute number of times here. Now anyway, no problem in this case. But if you execute number of times, so number of times you execute it. See, number of threads you have to create, but total number of seats are so 15. Remaining seats are 15, and after reserving 10 seats, okay, you execute number of times. See here. So here we'll just display. Okay. But testing has to be done by executing it number of times so that there will not be any logical error, right? Yeah, don't think that output is the same. Don't think that output is the same. This output changes when you execute number of times, right? Testing has to be done. Until you don't do testing number of times, okay, so you cannot say that your application is executed successfully, right? Okay, so without synchronization, you try to execute. With the synchronization, you try to execute. Okay. So without synchronization, you try to execute. And with the synchronization, try to execute, right? But this is called as thread synchronization, or which is called as which one? Locking. So this is very much useful if you are working with a web development. So by default, your server, the server what you use, right, is a multi-threaded. For example, you are working with a Django. So you are developing some online reservation. Now you write a code for you write a code for which one? Reservation. When you write a code for reservation, when one client is reserving, now your Django server, it will try to create what here? Threads. Whenever client send a request, your server create a thread. So thread 1, thread 2, thread 3, and there is a thread 4 like this. It will create number of threads. And these threads will call which one? Reservation. But in this, you write the code in which block? Synchronized block. So that is where exactly it is used, right? Then next, we'll go for another topic here. And what is that topic is? So Python database, communication, and this Python database communication is called a PDBC. Okay, Python program, how Python program communicate with the database. So what we are talking about is how Python program communicate with the database. So that you can call it as Python database communication. Like in Java, you use what is called as JDBC. So that is nothing but Java database communication or connectivity. But here you are using which one? PDBC, which is called as Python database communication. Java database communication, and one more is Python database communication. So every project required to store the data in what? Database, right? So every project or every application required persistency. Every project or every application required persistency. So persistency is storing data permanently. Persistence is a process of storing data or information, permanently. It's called as what here? Persistence. So persistence is a process of storing data or information permanently. Because whatever data you are creating, all this data get created within the RAM, and whatever data you are storing within the RAM is not permanent. Whatever data you are storing within the RAM is not permanent, is what here? Temporary. To save this data permanently, you are using two systems. One is a file system and one more is what? Database system. Okay, to store data permanently, okay. So two systems are used. Okay, any programming language. One is a file system. That is what we have seen already. Like how to create a text file, how to create a binary file, and different types of text files, writing data, reading data. Okay, one is a file system and one more is a database system. But there are some limitations. Of what? File system. There are some limitations of the file system. So what are the limitations of file system? So files cannot hold a large amount of data. Files cannot hold a large amount of data. So file cannot hold large amount of data, and files are not secure because where the files are stored in hard disk, and operating system will not provide any security, right? So files are not secure, and file system doesn't provide any query language. File system doesn't provide any query language, right? So file system doesn't provide any query language. No, it doesn't provide any language for manipulating what here? Data. Suppose if I want to insert data, I need to write my own program for what? Inserting. If I want to delete data, I need to write my own program for what? Deleting. So there is no query language or support for manipulating what? Data. So these are the limitations of file system. So to overcome the above limitations, okay, so applications uses
Recording in progress.
So this is what will happen here. So these are database softwares like MySQL, Oracle. So Postgres SQL, MS Excel, MS Access, Sybase SQL Server, and one more is MongoDB, right? So all these are called as database softwares, right? Okay. Then, so this is how Python. So this is how Python communicate with various databases, right? So I want Python should communicate with the various databases, right? So assume that these are various databases. Like this is the database called which one? Oracle. So this is Oracle database here. Okay, so I want to communicate with, so which database here? MySQL database. So I may communicate with which database here? Some SQL. SQL what here? Server. Then how to communicate with these various databases? Okay. So this is a Python, right? So I want my Python program. So you can say this Python program is called as a front end in this case. I want my Python program should insert data, update data, or delete data from which database? Oracle. Then how this communication is done? This communication is done by using various libraries. So Python provides various libraries to communicate with the various databases. Okay. Python provide various libraries to communicate with the various databases, like either it might be Oracle or it might be MySQL or it might be what your SQL server, right? Any database. So it will provide some libraries. But before talking about this database, first I'll just give you the overview of which one? SQL, right? Because you should know some SQL commands. To work with any database, you should know some SQL commands, right? So SQL stands for here structured query language. undo
Recording in
the
progress.
changes. Okay. Because database is separate topic, but without knowing these commands, you cannot work with the database. So create, I'll tell you create, insert, update, delete. Okay. And then how to retrieve it by using select. Then how to save the changes by using commit. And how to undo the changes by using rollback. Okay. Yes. Then before that, okay, we'll see the syntaxes. And along with the syntaxes, we'll also see like working with which one here? MySQL database. First, I'm telling you how to work with the MySQL database. Okay, these commands along with the syntaxes. I'll tell you these commands with the syntaxes. Working with which database? MySQL database. Working with the MySQL database, right? Along with the syntax. Yes. So first, okay, how to download? Downloading. So downloading which database software? MySQL database software. So first you download MySQL database software. So where you can find this MySQL database software? Okay, now this is a link here. Okay, so this is download MySQL installer. You can find directly here. So yeah, this is MySQL download installer, or just go to downloads here. If you select the downloads here, you find so many things, right? So here you can select MySQL installer for which one? Windows. So you'll get this one. Okay, now I just place this link. So in this, there are two out there. One is Windows installer for web community. One more is MySQL installer community. Two out there. MySQL installer web community is there, and MySQL installer community is there. So here it will download the complete installer and then install. But here it will try to install from the web. So that's the reason it takes how much space here? 2.4. But this will take how much space here? 428 MB. So it is preferable to select which one? First one. Because it will try to download and install from web. So select. So this is the current version is 8.0. So select MySQL installer web community. So select this web community here. Okay, select this here. So select, click on this download. Once you click on download, you'll get this MySQL community downloads. There's a login sign up. Don't do anything, login sign up. No thanks, just start my download. Don't select anything. So just click on. Okay, just click on. Okay, just click on no thanks, just start my download. So just click on this. So you don't require to do